In this video, we'll take a look at the VR PC that I built inside the S4 Mini from NFC Systems. This build includes a Ryzen 7 1700 and a GTX 1080 Ti. I'll talk about some of the challenges that I faced in this build, how I overcame them, and we'll listen to some audio from the fans that I tested as part of this build. Links to the build log, the CPU performance graphs, and the GPU performance graphs can be found in the description below. Let's take a look at some video of the build.
Mr. DJ.
Okay, let's talk about challenges in this build. First up, power. So the GTX 1080 Ti pulls 240 watts when max capacity. When the CPU is maxed out, it and the rest of the system pull another 170 watts. So I needed a power supply that was going to give me well over 400 watts, especially with peaks, probably in the 450 range. I ended up going with a built-to-order PSU from a manufacturer who advertises on smallformfactor.net. It's a Pico PSU with a separate brick, converting the AC to DC. I provided a link to that PSU and that vendor in my description below if you'd like to check it out. Here's some video of that PSU inside the case. Next up was heat. On the CPU side of things, I'm using a Noctua low-profile cooler. It comes with a 92 by 14 millimeter fan. At max performance, I didn't have any throttling, but my temperatures were in the mid to high 80s, much higher than I felt comfortable with. On the GPU side of things, obviously the Ti comes with its own two fans, but at max performance, I found that the clocks were downshifting more than I really wanted to see. I tried adjusting the fan curve on the GPU to see if I could get better performance, and while I did get much better performance, the clocks were much more stable, higher. The noise was just too much. It sounded like a jet engine in my room, and it just wasn't good for long-term usage. So I definitely need to do something about the heat. The first thing I tried was actually creating two chambers, one for the CPU, one for the GPU, using a piece of cardboard as sort of a separator. This was to help ensure that we didn't have any heat bleeding between the CPU and the GPU, trying to keep those two elements separate. It helped a little bit, but by itself, it didn't really help much. So I needed to look at replacing the fans. I decided to try replacing the fans on both the CPU and the GPU. And so I did a quick test by removing the 92 by 14 millimeter fan. I removed the bracket, and I had enough space or clearance to put in a full 120 by 120 by 25 millimeter fan. I did a quick test with it. I saw much better performance on the CPU, and so I decided to do a full set of fan testing on the CPU as well as the GPU. I also decided to record some audio that we'll listen to here in a minute or so, but from a methodology perspective, what I did was I set up two microphones, one microphone pointing at each sort of fan or noise source, and then I would run recordings at idle, max performance, and then to sort of represent a standard game environment, I ran the Metro Last Light benchmark 3 times, and I recorded audio for that, and just using that as a rough guide of what it would sound like in a normal gaming situation. We'll listen to the CPU audio fans coming up. I tried 7 different fans. Here's a listing of them, as well as the audio at idle, max, and Metro Last Light benchmark. On the GPU side of things, I had to make more modifications. First off, I had to remove the fans, obviously, but I also had to remove the backplate. This gave me enough clearance to actually, with a little flexing, get a full-size 25mm fan on the cooler for the GPU, although at the very end, away from the I/O. So there is some card flexing. I'm not sure I'd recommend this for everybody, but it's working for me, and the card hasn't stopped working yet. So this gave me an opportunity to try a more variety of fans. I actually ended up trying 13 combinations, everything from 92mm up to 140mm. We'll listen to that audio next. If you're not interested in the audio, you can skip ahead 2 minutes. Okay, so what fans did I end up choosing? For the CPU, I went with the NZXT fan. I found that it had the most pleasing noise, at least for me, and performance was good. And then for the GPU, I went with a combination of a Gentle Typhoon, the 69 cubic feet per minute variety, and then two Fractal Design 50mm by 10mm fans. That combination gave me the most pleasing noise with some of the best performance, and so I ended up going with that. On the GPU fan replacements, you can see here that the card itself, as well as the 120mm fan, come right up to the edge. I don't think this cooling or this card even would have been possible with the standard wraparound bezel that comes with the chassis. I'm using one of the NFC Systems special bezels. It has a hollowed out piece around the graphics card area, so it can fit those extra long cards and still be within the chassis. Well, that wraps up the video. I hope it's been able to help one or two of you out there. We'll take a look at some final video from the build, and then we're done. Thank you.